Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer post-match debrief here on Thursday morning. With myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Patrick McPartlin as always, to pour over the coals of a 4-1 defeat for Hibs at Celtic Park. Only Nick Montgomery's second Premiership defeat since coming in as manager. Both those have come against Celtic and Rangers. Patrick, I've had a bit of time to stew on that result since last night. How do you feel about, obviously, the result, kind of these things, like you don't go to maybe Celtic Park expecting to win, but more so the performance from Hibs. What did you make of it overall?
Got a lot of feelings about last night's performance. Sort of mixed bag, really. I think for starters, it's not a huge surprise when you consider the result. Hibs went to Rangers a few weeks back and were quite comprehensively beaten. Did the same last night going to Celtic. Same thing happens. Nick Montgomery's talked about this before. The difference in finances between the teams, I think, means that Celtic and Rangers are always going to have that upper hand. And yes, there's going to be the odd game here and there. We've already seen other teams, giving Celtic and Rangers a bit of a game on their own patch so far this season. But there were a couple of things at play last night. One, I think, would have been Celtic's performance at the weekend against St Johnstone. Media headlines in the aftermath were full of Brendan Rodgers being angry with first half performance and just wanting a reaction. Obviously they did get the result, but that combined with the fact that there were a few maybe fringe players given a start last night, given a chance to impress, that all kind of comes together to create a kind of perfect storm, if you like. You've got players looking to impress, you've got players who don't particularly want to get shouted at for the second time in a matter of days. And I think it's not, the result was not a surprise. I think the biggest thing for Hibs fans these days, when Hibs go to Ibrox, go to Celtic Park, it's about the performance, and it's about can they walk away saying, well, we gave 110% and we could have done much more. I think there were certainly aspects of the performance that were good. Nick Montgomery said this, and it's always easier to kind of look back after sleeping on it and think, yes, there were, some positives to take from it. And at the same time, it's worth remembering that, Hibs are kind of being held together by rust and chewing gum at the moment. When you consider, Jordan Abita wasn't risked, Dylan Venti was on the bench but didn't play. They've got 4 or 5 players who are out injured at the moment. You're bringing on a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old as subs, not really because you want to give them a run out, but just because there aren't really any other options for those positions. And I think that tells you where Hibs are at the moment. And I think with the busy festive season coming up, there's a lot of difficult fixtures. And I think for Montgomery, it's really just a case of trying to keep the players ticking over and make sure that he's not losing anyone else to injury. So, not really a surprising result. He talked about the manner of the goals conceded, and I would agree with that. I think, certainly the first goal is, it's one of those where, it hits Carter Vickers, it could go anywhere. I think David Marshall's probably going to stop it if O doesn't get a touch. So that's just one of those goals you can't really do anything about. The second goal, it's poor. Lewis Miller really needs to be closer to Palma on that right side. And you can't leave someone as much of a threat as Matt O'Reilly unmarked in the box. And I think a couple of players not covering themselves in glory for that particular goal. The third one, a penalty. We could probably talk about this in more detail later on, but the rules of the game, it is a penalty. You don't often see them given. It is soft. I personally didn't see too much different with that penalty that was given last night to the one on Lewis Miller at Dundee, which wasn't even checked. And there is that big debate if that happens in Celtic's box and it's a Hibs player, is it going to get looked at? Is it going to be reviewed by the referee? But let's not turn this into another VAR discussion. And then the fourth goal's just, it's well taken, but I think Will Fish has brushed off the ball too easily. So individual mistakes, I think leading to at least 3 of the goals, which is frustrating. It's not what you want to see. And yeah, I think it's one of those things. It'll be frustrating for Montgomery because he's sort of drilled into his team how he wants to play. They've got this identity now that you can see And little things like that. It just feels a bit like for every step they've taken forward, that just takes them a couple of steps back. So I think I think there will be things to work on the training ground leading into Saturday's game, which we'll talk about later. And I can see maybe a couple of changes as well, just to kind of try and freshen things up, because it was a good performance on Sunday against Aberdeen, and I think you probably have players feeling a bit jaded after that who maybe put in quite a lot. Obviously, Rory Whittaker on the bench last night after playing more minutes than I think Montgomery was wanting him to at the weekend. I think he said something about he was going to sub him off and then realised not have any subs left. So it's about kind of balancing expectations with keeping the squad ticking over and try not to get too many more injuries and like knocks and niggles.
Yeah, aye, absolutely. I think the most frustrating thing is, I mean, this is hardly, this isn't the kind of insight that you're all paying for, but it's just conceding such an early goal in these games. It's just the one thing you just don't want to do, and it's obviously something that Montgomery, I would imagine, he'd be really stressing before kickoff. Don't give them a platform early, and it's not just as a general rule. I just think we mentioned this last night. I think if you're going to keep Celtic out this season, the effect of not conceding early has been massive, because there's kind of pattern to games where they've toiled. Is that they don't then get an early goal. They find it difficult to get into their stride if they're not they're not scoring early. Obviously, you've seen it Kilmarnock in the League Cup. Then they did goalless draw with St Johnstone. They went away to Fir Park, and it was, I know there was late drama there, but it was really kind of turgid stuff up until then. Motherwell getting a draw at Celtic Park, it's just not allowing them to get into their stride early. Then seems to have a sort of effect on them as the game goes on. They don't seem to get as strong as they would do when they've got that kind of early goal cushion. So it's the manner of it as well. I think I think you can, if you go to Celtic Park and they carve you open, or somebody sticks one in the like they did at St Johnstone at the weekend. Matt O'Reilly's smashed one in for 25 yards, unstoppable into the top corner. If you concede a goal like that, then you're like, right, okay, well, what can we do? But I think to concede a set piece against Celtic, like I don't think they're renowned for being a great set piece team. They don't score. I mean, I could be completely wrong about this, but I don't feel like they score a lot of goals from corners. I feel like I've even seen their fans mentioning that over the years. Like it's just not something they do an awful lot of. So it was a soft one. You've already touched on the second one as well. I think it's clever as well from Matt O'Reilly, as poor as it is from Hibs. He kind of finally goes into an area where he's sort of between two players, and I think when that happens, there's always the possibility that neither of them bothers to pick you up, because they're then looking at the other guy. Dylan Levitt actually has a look at Matt O'Reilly, and it's as if he decides, Rocky's going to pick him up, and then by the time the cross comes in, it's Rocky does try to get across, but he's not been alive to it either, and it's too late. We'll skim over the penalty for now, because we'll come to that next. But the third goal, it's just a case of, I don't think O comes round the blind side of Will Fish, and I don't think he knows that he's there. I think you can clearly tell by the fact all that it takes is a wee nudge to completely take him out of the game, because he just wasn't set for that at all. So that's the kind of learning point for him. I think it's you're inclined to maybe excuse the odd mistake from Fish given his age. I think the fact that he's playing every single week, it's easy to forget how young he is and how little kind of first team experience that he really has.
That's true.
And how good he has been really good of late, I feel. So I think you can put that one down just as a learning point for him. Just it was just maybe a slight lack of awareness, sort of preparedness. But that's what it's concentration in these games, I think, is the real difference. Because Celtic will test you. Will test that side of your game more than any other team in the league, because it's constant. You're constantly being asked questions. You really don't have as much. There might be other games where switching off for a wee bit doesn't have much of a consequence, but it's totally different when you're playing against the best team in the league. And as you say, the difference in resource it's just massive, and I find it hard to be too critical of any team who either go there and not get anything, or kind of ships a few goals, because it's the gulf is just it's kind of unassailable. You're kind of, I suppose we can come to talk about that there are teams who have went there and frustrated them, and have maybe dug out a point. But I just wonder where kind of where do you come down on that side of the fence? Sort of the pragmatic approach versus the fact that Nick Montgomery's trying to build a certain style of play at Hibs. He's trying to implement something that hasn't been there before. The players are still in the process of learning that. So in terms of you might better chance of getting a result if you put 11 men behind the ball. You might scrape a draw. You might even scrape a 1-0, even though it's not. I think history tells us it's been 13 years since Hibs managed to get a win at Celtic Park. So even the chances, if you do that, the chances of you coming away with a result are still quite slim. So I suppose it's the balance of maybe being more pragmatic, maybe putting more men behind the ball, or is he right to? And I'm not saying that Hibs were completely wide open last night. That you could see what they were trying to do defensively as well, but then they did try to be more progressive when they had the ball. So it's that balance between continuing to build on what he's done already, or abandoning that for 90 minutes and just setting up for a siege. I just don't know. Or maybe come back to myself after, but what is more valuable? Do you think trying to play the Nick Montgomery style of play against a top team, and maybe shipping goals as they did, or do you feel that if you're going to Celtic Park, then there should be kind of less ambition shown and more sort of just let's set up and absorb as much pressure as possible?
Yeah, it's a kind of no-win situation, really, isn't it? If you go to Parkhead, if you go to Ibrox, and you park the bus, you go 5-4-1, you get beaten 4-0, then the reaction is, well, why didn't you at least have a go? And then if you go to the same venues and you try and play out from the back, you play attacking, you play Nick Montgomery's style of football as well, which can be it's quite cavalier at times, but it does have its shortcomings. We've seen that. We knew that before he came to Hibs from the games he'd had at Central Coast Mariners. And you can still end up losing 4-0 like they did at Ibrox, 4-1 like they did last night, and then obviously the reaction is, could you not be a bit more pragmatic? And it's there isn't. I think there's the tough thing for any manager, I think, is trying to balance going to these places and trying to get a result which realistically they don't really stand much chance of getting. If we just go by finances and the gulf and quality of the players that are on both teams. But I think it's worth pointing out that, Hibs went to Celtic Park under Lee Johnson and he sort of changed things up a bit. I think this was the game where he went for mostly English-speaking players in the starting 11 for communication reasons. I think Mikola Kure, which was the only sort of non-native English speaker in the starting lineup, and Hibs were kind of torn to shreds. Essentially, it was really, it was a really chastening defeat. It was so kind of one-sided, and you did sort of fear, is this going to end up being a cricket score? And then, ironically, the next time he went to Celtic Park, he was more conservative, and Hibs did get a man sent off in the first half. Eli Yuan got 2 yellows, and then Hibs took the lead through a penalty. And Celtic did equalise, I think, early in the second half, and then it wasn't really until the last 10 minutes that the Hibs sort of fell to a defeat. And you think with having played more than a half with 10 men, that's actually not a bad result. But there's so much at play. It's how on it the home team is, and I think when Hibs went to Ibrox, they were facing a Rangers team under a new manager, and you get that new manager bounce. And then you go to Celtic Park, you've got, as we were saying, players who are wanting to try and impress because they don't normally get a start, combined with the fact that there'd been a sort of an angry Brendan Rodgers at the weekend, and wanting to avoid a repeat of that. And the one thing I would say is that I was looking at the stats this morning, and Hibs had an XG of what was it? I think it was 1.66 from last night's game, which is actually the sort of highest XG they've had, highest expected goals they've had at Celtic Park since the 4-2 game back in October 2018. Which I think was under Neil Lennon. And, so that's, you look at the expected goals for some of the games, 0.08, 0.33, 0.38. Like if we're going on that basis, and obviously a lot of managers are very, they do spend a lot of time on the stats, they do spend a lot of time on sort of marginal gains, then they'll look at that and say, that shows that we did okay in the final third. Obviously, Joe Hart's had 2 good saves from Ellie Yuan. Should he have done better with at least one of them? Yeah, probably. But it's just, you have those games sometimes. You look at Aberdeen at Easter Road on Sunday, and the number of chances they had, and obviously didn't take them. It's always, there's always the risk of it playing out like that. But I think it's worth remembering as well that Montgomery is going to Celtic and Rangers with a team that it's not made up of his own players. I think, he's also got a few players out injured, which limits him. He's trying to rest, or not rest players, but he's trying to manage players who have maybe played a lot of football. And it's very, I think it's just very difficult to sort of know what the right approach is. Like, Hibs could have gone part of the bus and, it might have been 1-0 and you think, oh, that's not too bad. But ultimately, a defeat's a defeat. Whether you lose 1-0, whether you lose 4-1. And I think you said it yourself there, that with this new identity, this way that he wants them to play, the more they're doing that, the better. And if you're trying to play that way against the top teams in the country, then, surely the logic there is that you improve. Because then when you're coming up against lesser teams, then you've got more confidence, you're more experienced, and you can get away with things that you don't get away with against the likes of Celtic and Rangers. Certainly, I think some of the defending last night, Hibs probably, I think it was risky at times on Sunday, some of the defending, I think, and they got away with it because, Aberdeen's a whole different story in itself, but, against teams that maybe lack that sort of quality and firepower in the final thirds, they're not going to punish you as much as Celtic and Rangers are. So I think it's understandable that, why would you sort of scrap the way you've been playing for the last, however many weeks, games, just in the hope of possibly getting a result somewhere where you haven't got a result, in the last sort of 13 years. So I think the main thing is just for Montgomery to keep on getting his ideas across, to sort of, give the players as many opportunities as possible to, play the way he wants them to play, so that when they do come up against other teams who aren't Celtic and Rangers, they are able to get 3 points rather than 1 point, or 1 point rather than no points. It's, for example, like Hibs will be expected to go to Livingston at the weekend and get a result. They're expected to, host Kilmarnock at Easter Road and, get 3 points. There's not the same when you go to Celtic and Rangers. And I think the biggest problem for Hibs certainly in the past few years, has been not winning the games that they really should be winning. And, if you're winning most of the games that you should be winning, then, I think Lee Johnson used to refer to the sort of games against Celtic and Rangers as like bonus points or something like that. And I don't think Montgomery thinks the same way. We know he doesn't. He said that. He doesn't treat them as free hits. But I think it's interesting because he does seem to use them as kind of learning curves for the players. And I think he would be more, he'd be more sort of like disappointed if they didn't play the way that they can do. You think when they went to Ibrox, it wasn't a great performance. It's probably one of their worst performances under Montgomery. And you could tell that he was disappointed by that. He was annoyed that, they'd sort of given up the game plan, or they'd given up the style of play, and, it's just kind of given Rangers free rein. I thought there was less of that last night. There was less of that against Celtic, and that's, from his point of view, that's the positive. That's the good thing. There's been other Hibs teams that have gone to Celtic and have played worse than that and have lost by, a much smaller margin. It's such a cliche, but it's football, isn't it? It's, it's just one of those things. You even look back at the game of the weekend. I've watched that game back so many times. I've written about it, and I think how did Aberdeen not win that, never mind not score a goal. I mean, obviously the answer is David Marshall was in inspired form, and Aberdeen are a bit of a, I don't know, a funny club at the moment. On another day, that game could have finished 5-3 to Aberdeen, something like that. So there is that element of it's just the way football goes. But with Montgomery talking about taking the positives, you look at it and think, you got beaten 4-1, but they've tried to play the way he wants them to play. They've got a goal out of that as well. And if you take away the individual errors from the defence, it's probably a closer game than it looks. And I know it's daft saying if you take away the individual errors, it's like, if Manti had wheels, etc., etc. But I think the good thing for Montgomery is that if he can then say, right, these are the mistakes that we need to stamp out, everything else is kind of progressing well, it's going to plan, then that's obviously a good thing. And then you've got the January transfer window around the corner. You can look to bring in a couple of bodies where you need them. You're getting players back from injury, and I think things start to look a bit healthier. So I think I don't think you can criticise Montgomery for going to Celtic Park and playing the same way. I mean, it's not that long ago since he played exactly the same way against them at Easter Road and got a 0-0 draw. So you think he's perfectly within his rights to go and try the same thing again. I think at the moment, given the way Hibs were playing at the start of the season before Montgomery came in, I think it's just really important that the players sort of keep on following the methodology, the philosophy, whatever you want to call it, and just become the kind of team that can kind of do to the other teams what Celtic and Rangers do to the rest of the league most of the time, which is just go out, play their game, get a fairly routine result, job done, 3 points, up the road. And I think we are starting to see signs of that. When you think about the Aberdeen game, okay, yeah, they won ugly. Can maybe argue they also, won ugly against Kilmarnock before the international break, and then Dundee at Dens Park. But these are the games that they should be winning. These are the games that they have to win. If they've got designs on finishing best of the rest, then you have to be picking up points as much as possible. And I would imagine that's probably what Nick Montgomery's focused on at the moment.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think those Hibs players will learn more from that last night than if they just, put 11 men behind the ball and just tried to, suffer it out. Almost, I know. I know the counter to that would be, this isn't youth football. It's not about learning. It's about getting results. But I think, if you want to get behind a manager who wants to completely change the style of play, who wants to implement something that's more kind of progressive and attacking, I think you kind of need to, be prepared for a bit of pain along that process. If there's a lot of kind of, and I know there are reasons for it, but the Scottish Premiership is, in terms of thinking, it's one of the, there's a lot of short-term thinking goes on, I think, in the Scottish Premiership. I think it's why you see, and that the reasons are for it. If you're never more than a few bad results from getting dragged into the bottom end of the table a lot of the time, and I can see, there obviously there can be financial implications for that for clubs. Nobody wants to drop out of the league because it can be absolutely disastrous, and a lot of clubs take the viewpoint that there's no, we simply don't have time for trusting the process, as people say these days. The results come above all else. But I think there comes a point where if you want to kind of take your club and your team to the next level, then you need to keep complete trust in the way that your manager is wanting you to play, especially a manager who's come in and has shown that he can get more out of players that are already here. This is a guy who hasn't brought in any of his own players so far. He's shown enough, I think, to for there to be a certain degree of trust that he should be allowed to stick with us in every game, in the hope that in the long term it produces better results, more consistent results than Hibs have enjoyed in the recent past. Because I know, there maybe you've got like Hibs, Hearts, Aberdeen, who all have designs on being the third best team in the country, and it's a kind of the third force, the best of the rest. It's these phrases that kind of get bandied about quite frequently and quite loosely, but that doesn't happen overnight. It's you need to there needs to be a path to get into that. It's not just a case of, I know, like, you can maybe look at it and people think, well, Aberdeen aren't that good this season. Hearts I know they've had some decent results recently, but they're not exactly setting the heather alight. And I'm sure they'd be looking at it, the fans of those clubs would be looking at it the exact same way in terms of Hibs and thinking, we should be the third best, we should be consistently the third best, and everybody thinks that their team should be occupying that position. But I think, to really cement that, you need to undertake a sort of long-term process. And which is why I think, as I come back to my original point, that those Hibs players will learn more from playing that way against the best team in the country than they would just setting up for a siege. Because you said it yourself, it doesn't matter if you get beat 1-0 or you get beat 4-0, you still come away with 0 points. But at least from that last night, I mean, I'm not excusing the mistakes. It's stuff. There is stuff there that needs to be better. There's no doubt about that. I'm not trying to wash away everything that was wrong with the performance, but I'm just thinking of the general principle and maybe thinking long term here instead of just week to week, result to result. I think if you want to be better long term, then I think you maybe need to accept that if you're going to doing that will involve going to places like Ibrox and Celtic Park and trying to impose your game as well. It's a really hard ask. It's extremely hard, maybe potentially impossible now, with the gulf in resources and finances. But I think if you have designs on being the best of the rest, because let's face it, that unless the richest men in the world all come together and say, right, we're each going to buy a Scottish Premiership club, how is that gap ever going to close now? It seems the horse is kind of bolted there. And that's a whole kind of wider discussion about the future of Scottish football. But I just think if you've got kind of ambitions to be consistently the third best, you need to put a plan in place that's going to take you there instead of just worrying about results week to week. And I think it justifies, for me, I would rather see, if it was my team, just trying to stick to their principles no matter what the situation is, because it's the only way Hibs are going to, I think, get there in terms of this way that Montgomery wants to play. You kind of need to accept that there'll be a bit of pain along the way. And I think it's just, as I say, there'll be guys who will have learned, there's still some really young players in that team who will have learned more from that than, just sharing the ball up the park for 90 minutes last night and maybe getting a point. But what does that do in the long term? That's certainly the way I would look at it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we've said this before. We said it repeatedly. We've said it after other games that, I think the good thing about Montgomery's football at the moment is that no matter whether the opposition is, Celtic or whether it's Ross County, Kilmarnock, Hibs are playing the same way, and that's got to be. It's got to be better for the players to be playing the same way, that week in, week out, this is what's expected of me. If you come into the starting lineup, then you know what's expected of you. You know that you're going to be playing, a certain type of role. Whereas, it was, I know a lot of people there were a lot of biting references to, like, tombolas and bingo last season. And it did look like that at times, when, you'd see them playing a certain way one week, and then the next game it'd be sort of all changed. There'd be like four or five different players in there, and it would look disjointed, and you think, well, yeah, no wonder, because they're not being allowed to sort of stick to a way of playing. There was no discernible identity. There was no kind of recognizable way of playing. There was no like, oh yeah, that's how Hibs play under Lee Johnson. It was, and I appreciate that there were a lot of, he had to contend with a lot of injuries. Certainly in key positions as well. Doesn't have Martin Boyle for half the season. He obviously doesn't have Kevin Nisbet for half the season. There's lots of like ifs and buts. But I think with the team at the moment, they play this sort of base 4-4-2. Sometimes that'll change. It looks like more of a 4-4-1-1, or it looks like a kind of box formation in midfield. But you know that whoever is going to be playing, from the start, is going to know what's required of them. They're going to play the same way as the other boy did the previous game. in that position. And it's you said it yourself. It's about consistency. So you play that way against Celtic. You take the good points. You look at the bad points. You go to Livingston at the weekend. And you think, right, same again, but cut out the mistakes. And we play this way, then we should get a result. I mean, Montgomery's come in and he's had 2 defeats in the league, 1 to Celtic, 1 to Rangers. I think there's been draws that shouldn't have been draws, absolutely. We don't need to list them. We've been through them before. But he knows that, and the players know that. They've been the kind of most brutal of sucker punches, I think, especially away at St Mirren in midweek. The game against Dundee, Easter Road, where they kind of pummeled them, but remained goalless. And obviously his first game at Kilmarnock, 2-0 up, you draw 2-2. But there's been plenty of good signs from the way that Montgomery wants them to play. There is that identity. You can see it when they play, no matter who they're playing. And I think that's got to be, that sort of consistency has got to be a big positive for the players, for the fans, for the coaching staff, and that's only going to get better. They're only going to get more consistent, and if they can cut out the mistakes, get a few players back from injury, maybe supplement the squad with 1, 2, 3 signings in January, then there is no reason why they can't sort of make a real push for the best of the rest, provided they can just keep playing their own brand of football and make sure they're getting the results against the teams that they realistically have more of a chance of getting results against. And then obviously when they're playing the likes of Celtic and Rangers, if they can get a bit closer to them at Easter Road, play their own game in front of their own fans like they did against Celtic in October, and keep it going when you're away from home in Glasgow, and just take the benefits, and as you say, accept there's going to be a little pain along the way, but ultimately it's all going to help in the long run. And ideally you get to a place where Hibs are finishing kind of best of the rest, are getting into Europe. With that comes greater financial rewards, which allows them to put a better product on the park, etc., etc. And that's the goal, that's the aim. And I think I would say it's still probably early days in Montgomery's reign, because he hasn't sort of really taken charge of that many games, broadly speaking. And I still think there's a lot more to come from this team. I think there's a lot more to come from him. I would say he's probably learning along the way as well as the players. So I think there's certainly cause for optimism, and I think things are going in the right direction. And it is just about giving a manager time, to get his ideas across, for the players to be able to play the way he wants to. And we are starting to see more of that. And throughout this month, it is busy. There's some tough away games, but I think we will learn a lot more about Hibs and Montgomery over the next few weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I'm not saying that doing it this way is a guarantee of long-term success down the line, but I think it makes it more likely if you're sticking to what you're doing 99% of the otherwise, instead of because I think for players as well, it's the sort of trust element. It's they spend 4 or 5 days a week drilling how to play this way, and then the manager putting trust in players to take the ball, to be brave on it, but then suddenly it comes to one fixture, and then to rip that up, and some players could take that as, well, actually maybe you don't trust us to do it again. You don't trust us to do it against certain teams. I think it builds more buy-in long term if the manager is saying to players, I trust you to play this way against a team that are superior, who have better players, they've got more money. I just think from that side of it, it's just there's more long term thinking to it. But I think you can still obviously be critical of elements within the game itself, whilst also kind of agreeing with what the long term thinking is. And we've obviously we've looked at the goals, how kind of preventable and avoidable they were, and you kind of wonder if that is in a way is what is more frustrating, being completely ripped apart, and it's kind of looking as an error of your system in execution that just doesn't work, or is it more frustrating? Well, probably is more frustrating, I think, to lose soft goals the way they did. But speaking of frustration, will we touch on the penalty incident because it's
briefly?
Yeah. I mean, we've kind of had too many of these to discuss. I think this season it's just. I mean, it probably doesn't change it's not going to change the outcome of the game. I don't think. I don't think Hibs were going to come back from 2 goals down. But I think that the third goal, it kills it, doesn't it? It sort of kills it as a contest.
Yeah, of course.
And I don't know, but I mean, you kind of alluded to it earlier, but I think it was a wee bit. I think it was a bit soft. I can see maybe why it's given, but it's the whole kind of thing about VAR is with incidents like this. Offside is kind of subjective. You're either on or you're off. That's it. But with ones like this, is it not supposed to be? Has the referee made a clear and obvious error and not given a penalty? And is it, to me, could you really argue that John Beaton totally blundered by not awarding a penalty straight away?
Yeah, I don't think so, to be honest. I mean, the thing that gets me is the number of times where, if you consider like what football is all about, like so much of football pre-VAR is about the element of chance. Like, does that shot hit the inside of the post and come out? Does it hit the inside of the post and go in? Do you get that penalty? Do you get that marginal offside call? Like, football, I've said this before, I will, die on this hill. Football is not meant to be sport, is not meant to be perfect. You cannot make sport perfect. That's why we love it. There's no, you can't just sort of say, right, this is good, but we're going to make it perfect. And by doing that, we're just going to, pause games for like upwards of 5 minutes while we decide, was he a wee bit offside? Was it a penalty? Did he leave his leg in? And it's just it kind of, especially with goals as well, it kills that sort of feeling you get from celebrating a goal. That you're punching the air, you're hugging your pals, you're falling down a few rows depending on who the opposition is and when the goal's scored, and then you have to stand around for the best part of 5 minutes while they decide, actually, was there a wee bit of an infringement? And it really takes away something from the enjoyment of football, which I think is why you could sort of go down the leagues. You're starting to see quite big attendances at local games because there is no VAR, and it's more enjoyable because mad things can happen and they just have to deal with it and get on with it. There's not going to be this sort of pause while people sort of like look at it from every single angle and try and ascertain if there was something illegal going on or whatever. The penalty last night, is it a penalty? Yes, it probably is. In if we go by the rules, but the thing for me was Johnston didn't claim for it, which I think is always interesting, and there seemed to be some suggestion that.
I said that is always quite telling, I think.
Yeah, and I think there was some suggestion afterwards that he'd even said to the Hibs players that he didn't think it was a foul, which kind of tells its own story as well. And like, I think the number of times that referees are called to look at something at VAR, I can only really recall one time where the referee went with his like initial kind of judgment.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether this is because referees are really keen for VAR to be seen as a good thing, but it comes down to like I've said this from the start. It's it's not some sort of like hip computer program that's making the decisions. It's another human being, And okay, yeah, the referee, the on-field referee, can go and look at it if he's instructed to by VAR, but then. If the VAR looks at it, they can get it wrong. But then if they're telling the on-field referee to go and have a look at it, then that's going to be sowing seeds of doubt in his mind, which is probably why, a lot of the time they go and view it and they say, oh, actually, you know what? Yeah, it is. But, you say it yourself, it's this clear and obvious. Like, we're starting to see it being used more and more for things that are not clear and obvious. And it's, clear and obvious from the amount of time it's taken to make the decision that it isn't clear and obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And... I said this earlier. I didn't really think it was vastly different to, the shout that Hibs had against Dundee. I think it was Bakayoko and Lewis Miller. Didn't look remotely different to the challenge last night. And the one at Dens Park doesn't get looked at, doesn't go to VAR. The one last night does. So, you're then at the mercy of whoever's on, video assistant referee duty, saying, actually, you know what, you should have a look at that. Yeah, I mean, would it have been the same story if that had been the other end last night? Who knows? Maybe not. But
probably not.
We've said this before. Like it's not a flawless system. You've still got the same people making judgment calls on these things, and there's no guarantee that they're going to get it right. Even with sort of like all the angles in the world and stuff like that, it's supposed to be clear and obvious. If it's not clear and obvious, then surely you give the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I would agree.
You make a good point that it's not probably gonna change the outcome of the game if it's not given. But Hibs did start the second half, fairly brightly, and the timing of the penalty just completely takes the wind out of the sails. They concede the fourth not long after, and then they do get a consolation, but it's but we got told that VAR was being brought in to sort of limit the number of decisions that referees were getting wrong, but it just feels a little bit like like VAR for VAR's sake almost.
Yeah,
and I just think
VAR stat padding almost.
Yeah, essentially. it's sort of, I just don't see how it makes the game better, whether it's for offsides, whether it's for marginal penalty calls, and all this chat about them bringing it in for things like corners and yellow cards and free kicks. You just think, save us from this. Honestly,
I know, it makes you despair, doesn't it?
I mean, goal line technology for did the ball cross the line or not, I'm totally fine with. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
No different to things like Hawkeye and cricket, tennis, whatever. That's fine. But I just think this sort of, the referee, the on-field referee is there in the moment. He sees something in real time. He makes a decision, and then he's been told to have a look at it. And that's obviously going to be sort of saying to him, have a look at it because I think you've made a mistake. And then that, you start doubting it, and then you're not getting anywhere with that. It's not making it a better spectacle. So, last night, yes, it's probably a penalty. Is it soft? Absolutely. Have Hibs had similar shouts this season under Nick Montgomery that haven't been looked at? Yes. Is that a bit weird? Yes. I know you're the same, just kind of bored of kind of discussing the ins and outs of why a penalty was given, why it was looked at for so long, etc., etc., etc. And it is hard to disagree with Nick Montgomery when he says there have been lots of instances for Hibs where it's not been looked at, and you think, well, why is that? Like, why? If it's to do with like the rules of the game, then there have been instances that should have been looked at, and if they've not, then it'd be really helpful if somebody from the referees could come out and say why.
Yeah,
but unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to get that, which is a shame, because it might help us have a greater understanding of why certain decisions are made. But it's not going to happen, so we just have to live with it, I guess.
Yeah, we've created a monster. I think you said it yourself. I think the key thing was that Alistair Johnston doesn't really look for it, and I think that we've all played football to some level, and if you've been fouled, when you've been fouled, and it's obviously his teammates are going to claim for it because you see your teammate going down in the box. It's natural, but he doesn't even look at the referee, Alistair Johnston, and it's not like it's not like he was too shy to claim for it. I've kind of been in press conferences where he's speaking, and he's not an introvert at all. So if he's been fouled, I think you would have seen him claiming for that. I do think it was a wee bit harsh on Hibs, and just it's one of those ones as well where the slow down replay makes it look a bit different from how it actually transpired in that split second. But I do. It's not like I don't think it would have changed the outcome of the game overall. So moving away from that consistently painful subject, and not just for Hibs, just for every team in the as it's never, absolutely never. So a kind of change of emphasis for this weekend. Hibs going away to Livingston. It's a one that's they're very much going to be expected to go there and take 3 points, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think the interesting thing, or the kind of warning for Hibs, is looking at Kilmarnock last night, who went to Aberdeen in what could be described as woeful vein of form on the road. And as we know, got a 1-0 win. So I think, if you look at how Livingston are getting on this season, obviously they had that result against Hibs earlier on in the campaign that essentially spelled the end for Lee Johnson. I don't think it's by any means a sure thing. It can be a really tough place for teams to go. I'm not going to talk about the pitch too much because otherwise we'll be here for ages. But that can be a bit of a kind of leveler at times. Livingston obviously showed against Hibs early this season that they've got goals in them. They're not a bad team, but they've been in a bit of a sort of funny kind of vein of form. But things like this always come to an end, and somehow 9 times out of 10 it seems to be Hibs that it happens against. So there's a lot of it's a potential banana skin if you can have banana skins in the league and not the cup. But I'm going to go with that. I think it's the kind of game where if Hibs play to the best of themselves and don't make any silly mistakes, then they should leave West Lothian with the 3 points, which I think would also tell us a bit more about this team under Montgomery. Like, if they are serious about that best of the rest spot, European football, getting up there, third, fourth, etc., then you need to be going to places like this, and you need to be putting in a performance, and you need to be getting the 3 points, whether that's an ugly performance or whether it's a swashbuckling performance that has everyone sort of purring because it's that good and liquid football, etc., etc. It doesn't really matter. I think it's important that they get the 3 points after last night's game. I think it's important that they kind of get back to this kind of a morale boosting result, and I think 3 points at the Tony Mac Arena would be the best place to, or the best possible thing they can do to try and get back on the horse after last night, and with a couple more kind of tough away games to come this month.
Yeah, that's this time of year, isn't it? It can become a slog. I know I've just spent half of this discussion going on about not sacrificing principles and sticking to your long-term vision, but I think if we can isolate it a wee bit, this kind of December period where it's just game after game after game, I think Hibs will try and go out and play their football, but I think it's at this time of year when there's so many games, it is always slightly more excusable if you can pick up the 3 points without necessarily showing your absolute best. And I think kind of Saturday is it's one of those games. I feel like you kind of rarely see great games on these plastic pitches. At times it can turn into a bit of a slog. Would probably be wary of Livingston. I think you should always be wary of a team who have found themselves in a rut, because the law of averages dictates that they're going to pull themselves out at some point. But I think they are a side that they're clearly struggling. I think a lot of the things that you saw that made this Livingston team effective for kind of able to punch above their weight for so long in the league under David Martindale, you're now not seeing those things. So as it's one you've got to fancy Hibs to take 3 points from, and it would kind of tee things up nicely again, going into, as you say, it's just constant games at the moment running up to Christmas and into the new year. But I think we'll leave it there for today. I think we've covered just about everything we possibly can in terms of last night, and then also obviously looking ahead to the weekend. So as always, just thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back after the game on Saturday to pick that apart as Hibs head down. Short journey down to Livingston in search of another 3 points. Thanks very much, as always, for joining us.
Thank you.